Good morning. We're going to continue on with our database project. Again, starting this one off with the vocab again, because again, I want you to keep thinking about the vocabulary we're using as we go through and make the connections. Now, today's video is mostly on the GUI side, but again, because we're talking to a database, I want you to take a look at the vocabulary we're working with before we move on, because it's really important we talk about how the idea of working with a database is kind of a big deal, and those vocab that we use with that is important, so we keep track of it. So again, we're going to be looking at what we're using with the prepared statement, the result set, and the school exceptions is what we'll possibly be handling with that. So those are the main ones we'll be working with today, but we'll see how that works and what we have to do for making that happen here in the code. Let's go ahead and switch over to that. So we previously reviewed the database controller. As you can see, we have all the methods we're working with on that right now, but that's not the focus of today's lecture. Today we're going to be taking a look at making the GUI and making that happen so we can actually run through that and actually make something happen for it. We'll go ahead and take a look at that. The first thing we're going to do is start off, of course, with our data frame. And our data frame is just like every other frame we're working with when we're talking about having the framework for the class. We can have a GUI on there. Again, just like default, we have a constructor. It takes a reference to the controller for the app. We call super as the first line of the constructor. Our last line calls setup frame. Inside setup frame, we install the panel. We set the size. We set the title. We tell it not to be resizable. And we set it to be visible true so we can actually see the screen. So that's the basic part right there. Let's go take a look at data panel where the work is going to be happening. All right, so inside the data panel class, as you can see right here, we have the package and data.view because we're in a package structure of model view controller, so we have everything handled appropriately. We have our imports for color, dimension, action event, action listener, so we can do some color and some GUI stuff. And then we have swing.asterisk, and then because the swing.asterisk doesn't include subtable information, we have to do java.x.swing.table.default table model as well. We also are referencing our controllers in this. We have both the app controller and the database controller, so we can talk to them, and that's what we'll be working for on that. The beginning of what we're looking at is we have our basic data members we have to go over. We have our app controller and our database controller. Now, as you can see right here, our app controller is not being used very much because I'm not doing any of the pass-through back and forth information I normally be doing in a project, but we have to access it here for a couple pieces. Then we have our data controller. Our Spring layout like normal, we've got a couple J buttons, a J scroll pane to hold the GUI that we're looking through, a J table to hold the actual database information, and finally text fields for input and output then there. Inside our data panel, we have our constructor as again that starts off with a call to super. We say this.app equals app. We then retrieve our database controller from app itself. And then we say that the this.app layout is new Spring layout. We have a submit query button, a submit DML statement button. We initialize our J scroll pane or J table appropriately. And then we say this.output field is a new J text field and this.input field is a new J text field as well. And then we call our setup panel, setup layout, and setup listeners methods. And so we'll go take a look at those. All right, the first one we're going to start off with is setup panel. Setup panels are a standard one for loading the things into the actual panel itself. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set our layout. I set a background color as always because I like to put some color in this, and magenta seems to be a really fun one to do. I then set the set preferred size to be a new dimension and pass in 800 by 800, which says the window builder default screen to load it for the right size inside there. My output field I never want the user to have interaction with, so I set enable on that to be false because it's just to display information, so we can have that. I then add the components that belong inside the layout. So I'm adding the DML button, the query button, the input field, the output field, and the table pane. Notice that I'm not adding the data table to it at all. The data table is going to be handled separately from this, as we see inside that method called update table view right above. We'll talk about that as we get there, but we do not actually add the field or table itself to the GUI on its own. We have our setup layout method. That's the standard method where I dump all the code from the auto layout generated when we use the window builder tool to put all the pieces in there. As you can see, it's all right in there. Not a lot of stuff we have to worry about, so we'll just go ahead and collapse that out because we don't really care about that right now. We are going to take a quick look, though, however, at our setup listeners method. As you can see inside of setup listeners, I'm adding listeners for the two buttons we're working with today. Standard add action listener and the action performed we always use. Inside the first one, we're saying a string action performed. We'll say string current statement is assigned the value of input field.getText. Okay, easy. Then we're going to retrieve the value count from data.handleDML statements, passing it that statement. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the statement from the user inside that input field. We'll send that off to the data controller via the handleDML statement method. That will return the number of rows that are affected and store that inside the count variable. And then we'll update the output field set text to be the number of rows affected. Not a lot to do for that. Again, take a look at the data controller video so you can see how handleDML statement works. That's what we're going for on that. Our submit query button is a little bit different. As you can see right here, I do the same thing. I start with string current statement is equals input field.getText. And then I say data.process query because I'm using the public method on that. It's a void method that simply does and sends the information to the query so it can be executed appropriately. I then call update table view. And then I go and say output field set text, number of rows retrieved, and then data.getCurrentData.size. I'm going to use that information of how much was actually affected by that. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the update table view method so we can see what we need to do for that. Now, The first thing we have right here is we're going to create a table model. We're going to get the existing model that's inside the database or the JTable right now. That's whatever is in there, and we're going to cast it using the casting tool of parens as a default table model, so we can get access to a couple methods. We're going to say table model at set data vector, and we're going to pass it data.getCurrentData and data.getCurrentHeaders, the getters from our database controller that retrieve the headers for the information and the files that we're putting inside that. Finally, we say datatable.repaint and tablePane.setViewPortView passing the data table. And what that does is it loads the data table now that has the correct data inside it and puts it inside the JTable pane so we can actually hold that information appropriately. That commented line out we'll take a look at in just a minute so we can see how that works. We'll go ahead and play this though so we can see what happens first. Let's go ahead and let's do a demo of the code for this. We can actually see how it works when we run this. As you can see, I have my magenta background. I have my output field, my input field, the two buttons I'm working with. And then I have a pop-up to process information. And again, you can look at the video on how to handle the processing information on the video for doing secure input. And so we just do a quick little user interface right here. So type in the username. In this case, it's root. I'm going to type in my password and notice that it masks the input so I can't actually show what I'm doing. And of course, I have to make sure I type in the right password because that's kind of a big deal. And I press OK. Then I type in the address that I want to work with, and I type that in, put it in, and the name of the password is the amazing manga fruit, because that's the one we've been working with in class all year. And since there's no exception going, that means we actually were able to connect to the database. We're good to go. And so we'll go ahead and we can just do a query on this right now. So we'll go ahead and select everything, and then from exports, and close our statement with a semicolon, and submit that query. As you can see right here, it retrieves all the information for that. It stores all the information. I can highlight that right there. I can see all the information easily, what's going on with each row. Really cool stuff. It says that there's 15 rows that were retrieved from that. Wonderful, cool feature. If I were to just do a query right here where I wanted to change, say, for example, one of the rows. And so if I want to go ahead and choose the delete me file. So I'll just write the query in right here. And so I want to delete from and then exports, where, and we'll say that population equals -9. And close out the semicolon, because I want to get rid of that line right there, the one I don't actually want in there. It's also called delete this for the district. And I'll submit that DML statement. And that now has a number of rows affected 1. If I were to go back and re-show everything that's inside that database, so I'll do show. I'm going to go ahead and select everything from exports. And I run that query. And now that line that I executed has been removed. So we can see the difference between running a simple DML statement as well as running a more complex query where I can get the information for that. And it populates it all right there. We can even make this one step better. So let's go back to the code really fast. Over here in the code, you notice we had that line right here for the default render we turned off that we weren't using earlier. If I go ahead and uncomment that out, what that does is it allows me to use a tool that's a renderer, so I can make my code look even cooler with that. So I'll just go ahead and save that really fast. And it's just a really quick class I made that can make that look a little bit nicer. And I'll just rerun my application again, so we can see what it looks like right now. And we'll do the one more version of this. And so we'll log in again, root, type the password, and give the address of the database, and manga fruit. And we'll do select everything from exports and run that query. And look how amazing that is. I now have an alternating color for each of my different rows. It looks really nice, and I have nice little borders between the cells as well. A great feature we can do to make that even better. You can even add more details to this by simply adding some more detail to the actual renderer, and it does some great stuff. And so we'll take a quick look at that really fast, and we'll move on. To make the renderer happen, all you have to do is make a custom class that extends the default table cell renderer. You then retrieve the default renderer from the super call. And then based on the color, if row is divisible by 2 or an even numbered row, we get the nice color right here. If it's an odd numbered row, we get that color right there. So it's a great way you can do that. You can even add more features and functionality like, if it's a special number, you can have it highlight the number, underline, underscore, whatever. You can do strike-throughs, whatever you want to do. But you can do all sorts of stuff by just changing the information on the component and the text therein. So you can do some really cool stuff inside that and make some really cool feature for that. And all you have to do is just do a little bit of feature by having a default cell renderer, and that's all you have to do to make that happen. Really cool stuff. So just a quick little review. We have our data frame The easy standard frame works just like everything else we've been working with in class, all the same as always. We have our panel, and we have inside the panel, we have the standard set of helper methods of setup panel, setup listeners, and setup layout. Setup layout we don't need to go over at all. Our constructor initializes all the values just like normal and calls the helper methods. Inside our setup panel, just like normal, we add the information. We do make one small change. We disable the output field because we don't want to have that be available for the user to work on. And I only add the pane, not the table, as one of the components that listed inside that. And then inside my setup listeners, I simply just tell it to send the information to the data controller using the appropriate information, because that way the only thing that the GUI knows how to work with is text and information they can handle by using the magic power of the set text method for that output set text. And over here, where output field set text number was affected, and my update table view method handles even a little bit more, where I use the data vector tool where I can retrieve those vectors of strings to populate the fields that go inside that we saw already inside my database controller. So again, if you want to do a little bit more review video, take a look at the database controller video so you can work with that. Or if you want to look to see how you can do pop-ups and do some more stuff with that, take a look at the advanced pop-up videos so you can make your pop-up videos do even more cool things. Thanks again. Have a great day. We'll move on and do more later. Thanks.